Okay, welcome once again. I'm Brian Lepask, Chief of Program Services at OPSC. With me today is Tracy Sharp, Operations Manager in Program Services. Have a bunch of other of us here too. Tracy and I will be facilitating today's meeting and helping out with questions and answers during and after the presentation. We have just one topic today. We're going to be talking about interim housing and natural disaster assistance. Casey Barr is going to be presenting. Casey and many others have been working very hard on this item. As many of you unfortunately know, we all have, I should say, an increased awareness of natural disasters over the last several years. We hope this trend reverses itself and goes away or becomes less frequent, but it may be something that we're dealing with for quite some time. So we hope that this program is going to be able to lend some assistance in the cases where times when those resources are really stretched and help is of the essence. And so that's our hope with our regulations today. We're going to be picking up where we left off after the meetings we had on this topic in February and April of this year. And we're going to be, like I said, we're going to be sharing those. We have, I think, a really good set of regulations for you. We've spent a lot of time combing through them very carefully. A big team of us have been spending a lot of time on them. So we're really looking forward to this discussion. And then once again, just a reminder, if you do have questions, we're going to be pausing quite a bit when we're going through the regulations sections today. So please feel free to enter questions into the chat, and or if we're during a pause or at the end of the presentation, you can use that raise hand feature if you prefer, and you can just ask your question verbally. So looking forward to it very much. I'm going to turn it over to Casey, and with that, I'm going to share my screen. So give me just one sec there, Casey.
All right, thank you, Brian. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Casey Barr, as Brian mentioned, and today I'm going to continue the discussion of the implementation of Proposition 2's provision for interim housing and natural disaster assistance. So in this presentation, we're going to take a look at the stakeholder feedback and responses received since the last presentation of this item back on April 10th. We'll also present some new proposed regulations that expand on those previously proposed. And then we'll also take a look at the new proposed interim housing and natural disaster assistance Form SAB 195 as conceptualized last meeting. In companion to this, we'll also present a checklist intended to support school districts requesting this assistance. Finally, we're going to wrap it up with some illustrative examples of baseline adjustments related to interim housing assistance, as well as an example of potential steps a school district might have taken as it relates to a request for natural disaster assistance. So before we begin, I'm going to do a quick re-review of the provisions of Education Code section 17075.20, which for purposes of this presentation will be referred to as the new statute, just to keep things simple. So OPSC previously discussed the provisions and concepts for the implementation of this new statute at the February 13th and April 10th stakeholder meetings earlier this year. Within these presentations, we discussed the new statute, which provides authority for the State Allocation Board to fund interim housing following a natural disaster for which the governor has declared a state of emergency. This provision also authorizes the board to provide any other assistance. Also referenced in statute, this provision is applicable to school districts or county offices of education. These previous meetings discussed the broader concepts of implementation and allowed for us to get some really meaningful feedback from stakeholders that has had a really important impact on our proposed regulations being presented today. So as mentioned last time, the new sliding scale local funding adjustment grant and existing financial hardship criteria are applicable to this program. All right, so that being said, we'll go ahead and move on to page 2 of this item. Where I'll take a look at the stakeholder feedback and our responses since our previous discussion. Okay, so for question number 1, the stakeholder suggested that for purposes of any other assistance, the contents of interim buildings, such as furnishings, equipment, and other items required to support education operations during disaster recovery, should be considered for allowable costs. So in response to this, we appreciate and acknowledge the suggestion. So for context as to other assistance options related to this suggestion, the repair or replacement of equipment and furnishings is eligible for Federal Emergency Management Agency reimbursement if the damage or destruction occurred in a declared event. So examples listed under the first row within the table are on this page. Additionally, it's noted that in comprehensive insurance policies, items such as furnishings and equipment required to support educational operations may in fact be covered as well. But with that being said, the existing grant agreement for modernization and new construction projects cite specific furniture and equipment as eligible costs under statute. Therefore, the board may consider supplementing funding related to these items on a case-by-case basis, provided costs are offset by insurance proceeds and any other local, state, or federal assistance. Okay, moving to the second question on page number 3 of the cover. The stakeholder recommends that the definition for interim housing should not be limited to only those circumstances in which students are temporarily housed due to modernization projects or as a result of a natural disaster. So we acknowledge that the current grant agreement lists interim housing as an eligible expenditure for all types of projects. And we agree with the stakeholder that the current definition does not capture the variety of circumstances that may necessitate interim housing. As a result, we've revised the definition in SFP Regulations Section 1859.2, and that's presented later within this item for discussion. So with that, that concludes the stakeholder feedback that we've received since the April 10th meeting. I'd like to emphasize my sincere thank you to the stakeholders that contributed with their feedback and suggestions, as well as those who've just been attending and following these presentations as well. Very meaningful. So for your reference, full text of stakeholder feedback received may be seen on attachment B of this item. So also for your reference, recordings of these presentations may be found on a link located on page 4 of the item. Okay, so next I'm going to go ahead and move on to a brief overview of changes within the proposed regulations since our prior presentation on April 10th. So this document can be found on attachment A6B, and I'll give a quick moment to Brian to get down there. There we go. Okay. As he mentioned, we're going to give a little moment after each section presented just to open it up for any comments or questions. So let's go ahead and dig in. Under the existing definition section we have right there. So we propose a defined term for the Interim Housing and Natural Disaster Assistance Request Form SAB 195. So this proposed change right here is really just finalizing the proposed form number. Looking at the next, for the definition of interim housing, we've presented amendments to include the rental, purchase, or lease that is inclusive of when there's a natural disaster pursuant to the new statute that impacts the district. However, after publishing this item, we realized that interim housing purchases should only apply in the case of a natural disaster pursuant to the new statute. For normal modernization or new construction projects, the options would remain rental or lease, and purchase should really only apply to interim housing for a natural disaster pursuant to the statute. So this proposed change will be reflected in the future stakeholder item. Okay, so also in this section, based upon stakeholder feedback received, as mentioned earlier, we proposed an additional amendment to the definition of interim housing. This will include the term construction of classroom facilities, so as the definition is not limited. Okay, with that being said, I'll give a quick pause here for a moment and just open the floor for any questions about these proposed updates to the definition section. Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and move on. Okay, so due to the proposed change to the definition of interim housing, we realized we needed to update the gross classroom inventory and adjustments to the new construction baseline eligibility regulations. So for the gross classroom inventory, .31, currently interim housing under subdivision I refers to a modernization project. So by removing for a modernization project, this opens the regulation up so as it's no longer limited to just a modernization project. In the same vein, we're also removing the limiting language, proposing to, and utilizing the new updated definition of interim housing to inform regulations within the new construction baseline eligibility section. So that should be .51. There we go, under subdivision I-5. So let's see. Also in this same section, OPSC has developed additional proposed regulations to account for adjustments related to purchased interim housing portables, as well as any related to any net loss in classroom capacity for those impacted by a natural disaster. So if we move down to subdivision T, we can see two new proposed subdivisions. We'll start with T1. This subdivision is going to function as a placeholder adjustment for purchased portable classrooms. I would like to note that previously we had indicated that the placeholder would be applicable for both purchased and leased portables. However, upon further discussion, we determined that the placeholder should solely be applicable to purchased portable classrooms, and any portable classrooms leased beyond the 5 years would be subject to new construction eligibility baseline adjustments pursuant to existing subdivisions I-4 and I-5 within dot 51. Okay, and then moving to subdivision T2 in that same section, this accounts for the reversal of the placeholder adjustment of T1. And it specifies that this reversal is for when the school district permanently removes the purchased portable classrooms within 8 years of occupancy. So for references to the origin of the 8 years, we had looked at the standard 5-year allowance in regulation, in addition to the 3-year extension with this regulation section, and considering the maximum already allowed in regulations. We really wanted to provide maximum flexibility for school districts, and then we ultimately determined that 8 years was an appropriate time frame. We just really wanted to look at the maximum already allowed in reg in order to provide that flexibility. Okay, and then looking at the final addition to this section is the proposed subdivision U. This states that any classrooms destroyed or rendered unsafe to occupy as a result of a natural disaster declared on or after July 3rd, 2024, that will not be replaced, may be removed from the district's classroom inventory, and subsequently an adjustment may occur on the new construction eligibility baseline. This proposed addition indicates that the board may consider adjustments to classrooms that were destroyed or rendered unsafe to occupy before July 3rd, 2024 on a case-by-case basis. So shortly, we're going to take a look at an example of how these adjustments would look on the baseline. I'll go ahead and pause here and check to see if there's any comments regarding these proposed amendments in this section. I know that's kind of a lot of information all at once.
I don't see any new questions. There was a question in the chat that we could probably go over maybe at the end.
Sure. All right, thank you for bearing with me, just taking a look. It looks like Tracy was kind enough to respond. Okay. Okay, so with that, I don't see any raised hands. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the proposed regulation for interim housing assistance, which is .84.1. Okay, so we've included reference to the proposed new Form SAB 195 as a required document submitted by an authorized district representative to request funding to lease portable classrooms. Additionally, subdivision G was added, indicating that the apportionment would be subject to the program reporting requirements regulation. So brief updates within that particular regulation. And then we did have some larger amendments to the natural disaster assistance regulation, which is .84.2. We'll kind of go over those briefly now. So within this section, we added subdivision A there. It's been added to note that the board may consider previous SFP approved applications that have received an apportionment for the impacted site, specifically as it relates to the natural disaster. So for instance, if a school district had received a previous facility hardship apportionment related to the specific site that was impacted by a natural disaster, the board may consider that funding received as it relates to a request for natural disaster assistance. Looking at subdivision B, B1 references to a completed valid Form SAB 195 signed by an authorized district representative. That's been included there. Okay, we've also removed reference to grants within this section provided for purposes to this section as being just a new construction grant allocated on a 50% state share basis. We've removed this because grants provided may be allocated on both a 60-40 basis as well as a 50-50 basis in this section. This change is really to just ensure maximum funding opportunities are available under this assistance. And related to this, I'd like to verbally note that under the currently proposed regulation .84, we go up a little bit. Thank you, Brian. So with that being said, I'd like to verbally note that the phrase applications received on or after October 31st, 2024 are subject to matching share requirements in accordance with both section 1859.77.1 and 1859.79. Currently, only .771 is stated, but both shall be reflected at the next presentation of these proposed regulations. And finally, just going back down to .82.2, we're going to go to subdivision E, which has been added to reference that the apportionment will be subject to the program reporting requirements regulation, similarly to the interim housing section earlier. So notably, if a school district's request for natural disaster assistance is in lieu of funding for facility hardship, new construction, or modernization funding, the district must provide justification for its request within the submission of a request for funding under natural disaster assistance. So I'll go ahead and pause there and provide opportunity for more comment on the proposed regulations or any concepts raised here.
Thank you, Casey. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions about any of the previous inclusions too, though, we're just noting differences from the last item, but there's also a lot of stuff in here. If you want to comment on that, please feel free. Let's see. So Michael Gold asks, regarding 1859.84.1 and 84.2, actually both involved natural disaster assistance, with 84.1 addressing interim housing and 84.2 addressing assistance other than for interim housing. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. Yeah, so we're making that distinction there. So the interim housing is for specifically those things, and the natural disasters kind of anything else that might be necessary as a result of the incident.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Tracy, as well. Okay, so not seeing any other questions there. I'll go ahead, and what we're going to do is move forward to attachment A6C. As we kind of gone over all the changes throughout the regulations, we're going to take a brief look at the new proposed Form SAB 195. So after this item was published, we realized that the cover indicated that there were a total of 9 sections. However, I'd like to correct that there are actually, in fact, a total of 10 proposed sections to request either interim housing or natural disaster assistance. So for just a quick brief overview of this form, Section 1 requests that school districts indicate the type of application being requested. As a reminder, if a school district has multiple sites impacted, it must submit individual applications to request assistance for each specific site. Section 2 requests that the school district indicate any submitted applications that are currently on the OPSC workload or applications received beyond bond authority lists. Then we have Section 3. This is just going to request the school district indicate any applications specific to the impacted site and the natural disaster that occurred. And then Section 4 This is going to request that the school district indicate whether there's a state of emergency declared by the governor, and if so, that the school district provide the number of the executive order regarding the state of emergency and the date it was proclaimed. Okay, let's see. Section 5 is just a section for requesting financial hardship assistance. You'll see Section 6 is for the new matching shares requirement, also included within Proposition 2's provisions. And then number 7 is essentially for any entry of applicable Division of State Architect information. Okay, and then sections 8 and 9 are really for the school district to include respective narratives as requested in the instructions of the form. So dependent on the request for either interim housing or natural disaster assistance, you'll fill out one or the other. So as a reminder, individual applications are required for each request. So if you would submit an application for interim housing for one site and then also for natural disaster assistance for the same site, we would need 2 separate applications for those requests. So section 10, this is, you're familiar with certification pages. It's going to be the district representative certification section, similarly to 5004 that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. And then finally, we recognize that there may be substantial documentation accompanying these applications. So in the instructions, we really just request that school districts attach substantiating documentation as needed to support the district's request in tandem with this application or the form itself. So I'll pause here and see if there's any questions or comments regarding the Form SAB 195. I know it's very brief. See.
Thank you, Casey. Anybody have any questions out there? Anybody? Let's see. Just going to kind of scroll through the rest of this form here. There's again, this checklist is meant to be support for your submittal. So if you refer to this checklist, it should walk you through what you need and kind of some of the questions that we might be answering and help you collect the information that would be helpful for filling out the form, the actual request form. So that's what this document is for. So you'll see we're asking a lot about insurance proceeds, previous applications, actual costs, things like that. I think that about covers it.
Yeah.
Do we want to take a look at some of the examples that are in the cover?
Yeah, so we can go back to page 7 of the cover of the item, and we can kind of start with the topic of, net gains or losses of classrooms. Let's see.
There we go.
Oops. Perfect, thank you. All right, so yeah, we wanted to just discuss this topic and kind of look at a scenario and see how some specific scenario might impact the baseline. And then following that, go over a few kind of potential questions that we think may be important to address as it relates to these new adjustments that we discussed. So as mentioned previously, within the adjustments to the new construction eligibility regulation, OPSC is proposing 2 additional subdivisions, T and U, which will account for the changes in classroom inventory resulting from purchased portables regarding interim housing assistance and any net loss in classrooms that were destroyed or deemed unsafe to occupy that are not replaced by the school district. So scrolling a little bit down on page 8 there, we have prepared an example as to how the school district's baseline eligibility may be impacted by these adjustments. So in this example, we have California Poppy Union School District, one school district that has previously established new construction eligibility and has received an apportionment for new construction application. So this is strictly illustrative, but in this scenario, a fire destroyed a total of 6 classrooms on their campus. So based upon enrollment needs, the district opted to purchase a total of 5 interim housing portable classrooms. Based on a loading standard of 25 for K6 classrooms, the school district would have a placeholder T1 adjustment on their baseline of minus 125 K6 pupil grants. So as seen on page 9 as we go forward, 2 years later, the district opted to remove the 5 classrooms from the school district. And upon notifying OPSC, the baseline has a T2 adjustment, which reverses the 125 K6 pupil grant transaction. The adjustment is made as a result of the district selling or removing the portable classrooms purchased for purposes of interim housing if it was more cost effective to do so as opposed to leasing. So finally, moving forward to page 10, upon reevaluating projected enrollment, the district opted to rebuild 4 of the 6 destroyed classrooms, meaning that 2 K6 classrooms with a loading standard of 25 each would be eligible to be returned to the district's baseline through an adjustment pursuant to the proposed .51 regulation, subdivision U. So these adjustments allow for the baseline to account for the additional capacity of the purchased portable classrooms, specifically for interim housing assistance under Prop 2's provision, as well as any net gains or losses of classrooms due to a natural disaster for which the governor has declared a state of emergency. Next, we kind of have a few scenarios and responses in anticipation of concerns regarding these adjustments, and we recognize these are totally new, so we just want to go over a few concepts. So for scenario 1, what if the school district has never established new construction baseline eligibility? So if school district has never established new construction baseline eligibility, no eligibility adjustment would be necessary. For scenario 2, what if the school district has a new construction funding application for which the added adjustment of temporary housing negates any demonstration of capacity needs? So for instance, let's pose that California Poppy Union had submitted an enrollment update for the 24-25 enrollment year that provided them with 125 K6 pupils pre-natural disaster and had a new construction application on the workload list that was set to be processed at the same time the district suffers a natural disaster, in tandem with the wish to request interim housing assistance and purchase portable classrooms. So on page 11 here, in this instance, we propose that the funding provided for the application would have a special condition attached. So therefore, we propose that we may evaluate eligibility preceding the adjustment in this circumstance, which is reversible once the portable classrooms are removed, unless the district wishes to retain the housing beyond the replacement of the facilities for purposes of applications requesting this specific natural disaster assistance. So we recognize the need to be flexible as it relates to applications received for the assistance related to this new statute. So that's essentially the origin of that concept. So we look at scenario number 3. If the school district requests reimbursement for interim housing and the facilities have been removed from the campus at the time of its request, would there be any line adjustments to the new construction eligibility? So our response to this is that no adjustment to the baseline would be necessary if the interim housing has been removed prior to the assistance. Okay, and then moving to page 12, I'd just kind of like to do a quick overview of some potential steps leading to a request for any other assistance under the new statute's subdivision E. So in a hypothetical scenario wherein a massive fire has destroyed the entirety of California Golden Bear High School, the governor declared a state of emergency that is listed as open on the California Office of Emergency Services website after July 3rd, 2024. The board approved a design funding apportionment for an SFP project for this specific site. And subsequently, the district submitted an SFP application and an accompanying appeal request for the immediate processing and funding for the full adjusted grant, provided availability of funding. So the board approved the appeal and its accompanying application for immediate processing and funding. Following this, the school district submitted an appeal for additional funding assistance pursuant to the new statute subdivision E for any other assistance. This example is not to bind any one applicant to a certain process. It's really just an example of how one might navigate the existing SFP programs in addition to the new statute's provision. So with that being said, this is really the end of the presented materials within the item today. At a future stakeholder meeting, we anticipate continuing the conversation on proposed regulations for program accountability requirements, including annual reporting requirements for the respective assistants. We will also have 2 proposed new grant agreements for interim housing and natural disaster assistance. And we'll also have a few considerations for the offset of any future insurance proceeds or disaster assistance after an apportionment. So for your review and reference, as you kind of take a look at this item and digest it, pages 12 and 13 have an outline of how the 2 grant agreements for interim housing and natural disaster assistance might look like or will include. We welcome any feedback on this item, I believe until the close of business June 27th. And with all that said, I would like to thank you all very much for your time. This concludes my presentation. I'll send it back to Brian to open the floor for any other remaining questions or comments.
Thanks, Casey. Yeah, that's a really, really well done. As Casey mentioned, we are going to have at least one more public meeting like this one today on this topic. Our goal is to provide as much flexibility within the statutory framework as we can. We know that all these projects can be very unique. And so the other thing I would mention is, these come in essentially as, I don't want to say they're an appeal necessarily, but they're open to interpretation type of project. Like I mentioned, every project will be a little bit unique. And so we're mindful of that, and we're trying to build in those flexibilities so that we can be nimble when we approach them and when we fund them. So our goal is to provide as much assistance as we can within the framework. So that's really what we're trying to achieve with what we're doing here. With that said, we do have lots of time for questions or if you want us to go over anything else. So if anyone would like us to do that, or if anyone has any questions, now is the time. Either you can raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can put your questions into the chat. And like Casey mentioned, next time we will be bringing forward the grant agreement. We're going to model it off of our existing grant agreement templates, but it will be more specific to this type of assistance. And then if there's any regulation changes between now and then, we'll make sure to cover those. But I don't really think there's a whole lot left, to be honest. We've been combing over these pretty carefully for quite a while now. So hoping that next meeting will be our last meeting here, and then we can take them forward to the state allocation board and through the rulemaking process after that. Speaking of which, we do have some regulations going to the June SAB this month, so we're looking forward to those too. There's lots of great minds out there. Anybody have any questions? As Casey mentioned, we'll take feedback for at least a couple weeks. That said, if you think of something in 3 weeks, please still send it to us. But if you can, please take the time to look it over sometime soon and get your questions to us. That'll really give us the adequate amount of time to respond to it and consider it very carefully. So any questions we do get, we will bring up in our next item. And there's a few things that came up already today that I think we'll be addressing in our next item as well. So the feedback is very much appreciated. Okay, seeing no questions. I guess that's going to be the end of it today. Thank you for spending some time with us this morning. As always, we appreciate the collaboration. looking forward to seeing you again soon. And I know a lot of districts out there are on summer break now, so enjoy your summer. Have some fun with your kids if they're home, and we will see you next time. Everybody take care. Thank you very much.